19 after 8 o'clock. Welcome back to the show. Do hope you're going to stay with us right up until 10 o'clock. Now, corruption has been in the spotlight in South Africa for several years, particularly since the launch of the state capture inquiry way back in 2018. And of course, we also know the COVID-19 pandemic combined with deep divisions in the ruling party have only exacerbated the social and financial hardships of the population. That's at government level. What is happening in the private sector? Does it mean that when we have these sort of issues in government, it kind of goes all the way down right to the bottom? As the old saying goes, the fish starts rotting from the head down. On the show this morning, Steve Powell from ENS Africa. He is the director of forensics at this law company, and he's going to talk to us about just how widespread corruption is in the private sector. Steve, morning. Welcome to the program.
Morning, Julie. Morning, listeners. Corruption is a major problem in South Africa, and the focus always in the media at Zondo Commission has been unearthing massive corruption at various state entities. But what we need to understand is corruption is alive and well and flourishing in the private sector. Everywhere where you have procurement, where you have commodities and you have financial resources, there will be people targeting procurement chiefs, buyers, etc. And very often the companies are out there bribing the state as well. So, we always talk about a corruptor and a corruptee, and the private sector plays a significant role as the corruptor, Julie.
This takes me back to my days in the corporate world. And I remember I was working for a multinational, and we were obviously given our contracts on, when we obviously contracted with the company. And we were also made to agree that, and sign obviously, that we won't accept gifts above possibly a value of 500 rands, because the company or most major companies believe that if you do accept gifts, obviously you could be very easily corruptible in depending the value of the gifts. Is that still a done practice in this day and age? And what does it say about corruption in other parts of the world? We can't only assume that we in Africa or South Africa are very easily corruptible.
Correct, Julie. And I think you've made an important point, and I'll kick off with the second point first. Corruption is a global problem. And what happens is that where you have emerging markets, Latin America, China, India, Africa, the corruption levels are greater than the rest of the world because it's the superpowers and the super corporates in some of the dominant countries like Northern Europe, Scandinavia, US, UK, etc., that are paying the bribes and corrupting within those developing markets. They're anxious to win contracts, win lucrative state tenders, and they're very quick to bribe. That has changed significantly in the last couple of years because there is global legislation like the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of the United States, and the United States robustly pursue and agree enforcement actions against companies that pay bribes, and the UK does something similar. But going back to your example around the policy, most companies need to have gift policies that prescribe conservative limits on what an employee is allowed to receive. I'm busy with a case right now where I'm looking at employees that have been terminated by the company. They've gone through disciplinary processes and the employees have been fired. But now we're looking at why those employees were fired. It's because they accepted gifts that they didn't declare, and the gifts were way above 500 Rand. On one individual, I've just had a look at the charge sheets on the disciplinary hearing. He's gone to the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the British Grand Prix, the Belgium Grand Prix. And each time it's flights, accommodation, and what the policies need to protect against is, once you provide a gift that is worth thousands of rands to an employee, you've just diminished their impartiality. They are indebted to you. They are going to give you orders. They're going to not shop around. It's just completely wrong. So and it is a legal requirement, Julie. I think it's important to share with the listeners that, in terms of the South African law, the Companies Act, companies have to put an anti-corruption program in place. They've got to have the gift policies. They've got to have limits on sponsorships, donations. They shouldn't be making donations to political parties at the same time that, for example, the ruling party is issuing massive tenders. You've got to look at the timing, look at the values, look at what you're doing. And that is all dictated by Regulation 43 of the Companies Act. And the CIPC issued a guidance note. And for anyone who is not aware of what your anti-corruption program needs to cover, you can download the guidance note from the CIPC website. You just type in onto Google CIPC guidance anti-corruption, and there's useful information there. People have to put in those processes and make sure they don't accept these ridiculous gifts.
Interestingly enough, people don't view it that way, do they? They just kind of think that, oh, he's such a nice guy, and because he's gifted me, so generously, I need to repay in kind, possibly. I need to do something equally generous for him, and that's when the corruption sets in. But the people at both ends of the spectrum don't seem to see it as corruption. They don't seem to view it as corrupt practices.
There's a psychological term for that, Julie, and we call it rationalization. So if you steal, you're a thief. But if you borrow, you're not a thief. And the same applies to a bribe. You can't get a loan from a supplier. That's a conflict of interest. You can't be indebted to the people you place in orders with. But what the crooks do is they take a bribe and they call it a commission, and in their own mind, they internalize what they're doing and take the moral stigma out of it. And what is happening currently is that individuals are under pressure, and that has just increased the risks to organizations of employee stealing and getting up to acts of fraud, because we are going through immense hardship. And in many cases, companies aren't hiring. We've got massive responsibilities. We've got limited oversight because we're working from home. And that just means that the fraud opportunities are so much greater. And the pressure on individuals to make ends meet means that they start looking for ways to steal from the organization. And the hardship pushes former law-abiding employees into committing crime.
Okay, let's go back to government. And when we look at President Cyril Ramaphosa, he's positioned himself as an anti-corruption activist for many years. And in 2020, he took a number of key anti-corruption steps that have heightened tensions between the different ANC factions. And I guess that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this deep divide within the ANC. And I guess he can afford to do that because he is a multimillionaire in his own right.
Correct. But I have been very impressed by what our president has been trying to do. And he has introduced lifestyle audits into the public sector so that, we look at senior government officials and we look at their lifestyle and make sure that they live in commensurate to the income. Because you remember, Julie, there were some really people who were not embarrassed when they gave evidence at the Zonda Commission about the sports cars, the Aston Martins, etc. And when you ask how these things were financed, it was, financial support from a family friend. And that is just ludicrous. So our president has been trying to correct things, and he has made some, I think, excellent appointments within the NPA, and we've got some really competent people. And I am hoping that we help the president in giving effect to this anti-corruption message by making examples out of the people who have been exposed at the State Capture Commission, and we get to some quick enforcement. I think the key criticism at the moment is we want to see enforcement in action. People have to know crime doesn't pay, and that if you're going to steal or accept bribes, you're going to go to jail for a very long time.
This is such a widespread practice in the corporate world as well. And I'm talking about multinationals. And sadly, those people are not brought to book. And those are the very, the head honchos at these large corporates. have great relationships with people in government. Undoubtedly, Cyril Ramaphosa is trying his utmost to stem this out. But he has got a long, hard trek ahead of him. That also brings us to the question of the state capture inquiry and the recent civil unrest. Are we suggesting then that if corruption wasn't as widespread as it is, we might not have gotten to the point 2 months ago of all the unrest and the rioting?
I think corruption is a major problem that is depriving and hurting individuals at every level. And I think what we got to just with the violent outbursts just in the last period was it was almost the crescendo of discontent that I think has been fueled by the corruption that has unfolded during the decades that we had our former president in power. I think our current president is doing his utmost to try and turn the tide, but it is a long and a hard road. Getting convictions for corruption is never easy. The evidence is hard, it's difficult to prove, but we've got competent people that I think are making a concerted effort to bring those felons to book.
You've been in this game for a very long time. You are Director of Forensics at ENSA Africa. When you guys do your forensics and you then manage to find the culprits, and you've got all of the evidence stacked up against the perpetrator, so to speak, what is the next step, very especially in corporate? Do these cases land up in court? Are these people made to serve jail sentences, or do they just get dismissed from corporates, from companies? Because that would then say they're getting off very lightly, and the corruption then just continues.
Exactly, Julie. I can assure you that we've taken many cases to the NPA where the individuals have had overwhelming evidence against them, where there's a solid money trail and evidence to prove the crime. We've managed to secure convictions. Individuals have done plea and sentence agreements with the state. They go to jail for between 5 to 10 years. We've got many examples of that having taken place. So what we try to do on the forensic side is we go to the state with cases with solid evidence, sometimes with confessions from the suspect when we catch them red-handed with the money in their bank accounts, and those do get converted. If someone steals more than $500,000 in South Africa, the mandatory minimum sentence is 15 years jail time. So, and we do get those kinds of sentences. I know for one of the big cases I did at the City of Cape Town, we had directors, supervisors that were involved in corrupt activity, and they got a 10-year jail sentence, and they appealed against the 10-year jail sentence, and the court said to them, gentlemen, you are fortunate that we don't increase that sentence. We think that the punishment fits the crime. And the message is, if you're going to commit the crime, you must be prepared to do the time, because we are going to see over the next, I predict, 3 to 5 years, we're going to see an enhanced and effective NPA and successful prosecutions with convictions. And that's the message we need to send. Thanks, Julie.
I sincerely hope so. I sincerely hope so. In wrapping up the interview for this morning, what's your very strong message, not only to corruption in government, but also the private sector?
To the private sector, my message is you need to have anti-corruption processes. You need to compete ethically. You have to show that commitment to doing business ethically and roll out the message to your organization. If you're going to work for this company, we will not engage in acts of bribery or corruption. And if all the companies out there start doing this, it'll become an even playing field for competition, and it will help eradicate corruption. Thanks, Julie.
Stephen Powell, ENS Africa, Director of Forensics of the company ENS Africa, talking to us about corruption in the private sector and, of course, in government as well. It is exactly 8:33, and we're going to take a break before we continue the show.